Secular Nation Podcast, brought to you by the Atheist Alliance of America. I am your host, Tim Brannan. My co-host, Michael X, couldn't be here tonight, but I'm with the one and only AronRa, new president of the Atheist Alliance of America and author of the book, The Foundational Falsehoods of Creationism. Aaron, great to have you on the show. Great to have you with the organization.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
So, all right, for those of the listeners that I believe exist, we have been on hiatus for
you have reason to believe that they exist?
Not hard evidence. Okay, I think I mentioned it in a forum somewhere, and someone said, "Oh, I think my daughter listens to the SecularNation podcast." I'm like, seriously?
Well, that's one of the things that I want to do with as president of Atheist Alliance America. I want to get a lot more attention to the Secular Nation podcast.
That's good. That is one of sort of my processes of maturity since taking over this podcast. Is I think I first started, I was kind of like, I walk into the scene, it's like, make way, people. There's a podcaster in the room. All right. Then it's kind of like you get to that point, you meet a lot of people. It's like, oh, you have a podcast too? It's like, yeah. Because literally anyone can probably do a podcast. There's probably someone with one of those micro cassette recorders right now doing a podcast now and just throwing the cassettes out in the air.
Yeah, well, I guess it doesn't matter that I was on radio a few times too.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean anything.
As I said, Michael X, our my usual co-host, he's not here today, but he will be joining us in future episodes, hopefully. And again, we're kind of revamping the format. We're rather than doing a strict thing of every episode we have like a different guest interview. It's more we will have sort of we're planning on having a rotating assortment of guest hosts. I did get a few people who are interested in the project. Hopefully that'll be sort of a regular thing.
Yeah, I've got an interesting thing. I have a friend that is he's an old friend, and he's a delegate to the Republican Party.
Oh, shoot.
Yeah, and that's interesting conversations that we have. Mm-hmm. It's always interesting when I get into their mindset. When up becomes down and left becomes right, and then you just have to walk away from the irreality of it.
Yeah,
where suddenly Bush gave us all of this great financial benefit, and Obama plunged us into recession. You know what I'm saying? I mean,
I know exactly what you're saying. It just kind of, it's just this complete alternate reality of everything Honestly, I argue with conservative types online a lot. A lot of times I find the best thing to do is just get them to say what they actually believe without, any sort of fancy, whistle words or just going around just like, tell me what you actually believe.
Well, it's more than just a different opinion. Everybody's entitled to their different opinion, but the way that I was raised in that environment, that mindset, I was fed absolute nonsense all the time, and so I had no idea that everything I was being taught is wrong. That's one of the only point of sensitivity that I have in dealing with believers, because I never was a faith-based believer myself. Yeah. I believed because I'd been lied to, and I trusted the people who lied to me. But I didn't believe on faith. I didn't understand really what that meant. And then once I did, that was kind of the end of it for me. I couldn't believe anymore if faith was required. And by that time it was too late to convince me that the nonsense was true, because that was already falling apart. Because I had this thing where I wanted to better understand whatever I'm being told. So I would go look it up. I'd go do more reading on this subject. And of course, everything they tell you doesn't ever turn out to be anything that you can actually verify, or worse, you can actually verify that it isn't true at all. And this was back in the days when you had to go into a library and get books on stuff, and now I don't have to take the 12-mile ride on my bicycle to the public library and look up the Dewey Decimal System. It now takes literally seconds for me to know that the nonsense I've been fed all my life is wrong. That's what I love about the internet so much. I used to work at a record store where people would come in and they would try to explain what this song was that they're looking for, and then they could never identify who the band was that did the song. I would go to this book that I swear this book was like 8 inches thick. Okay, and you would have to look up all these songs, and I would order like a 45 RPM record of that song, and it would cost like $20 in 1986.
Oof.
And it might get there in 6 to 15 weeks.
Wow.
Whereas now, if you can remember any passage from it, you just type in the lyrics that you can remember in Google, and you will be listening to that song in seconds.
Oh, yeah. Unless it's instrumental.
That's a little harder. So this has been a pretty crazy month for me already. I've got 3 different presentations that I have to prepare for, all within the same month. I'm supposed to be speaking at some kind of a secular hub in Denver, Colorado on the 20th, and then I'm going to be speaking at Dragon Con of all places.
Nice.
On the first weekend of September in Atlanta, and then just a couple weeks after that, I begin a book tour, which I'm going to be. I think it's 20. I think it's around about 20 different cities on the book tour. Most of them are going to be a driving run. I take off out of the Dallas area where I live, and I will be driving through New Mexico, Arizona, California, Oregon, Washington, Nevada, Utah, and and hitting all those. And then as soon as I get home, I get one night back in my own bed before I have to fly to Detroit.
Wow.
Yeah, and give it a conference down there. And then as soon as I get back from that, they haven't booked this one yet, but I've been told it'll be soon after I get back from Detroit. I've got to go to Bogota, Colombia.
Oh, yeah, jeez.
Yes, and my guide, or rather my host for this, is going to be the lead guitarist for the metal band Predator.
Awesome.
So, I'm going to Bogota, Colombia with a guitarist for a metal band. I promise you this has nothing to do with drugs. This is actually for an atheist conference.
Mm-hmm. And what conference is that?
I don't know. It was an atheist group that said they're communicating through this other guy because he speaks fluent Spanish, and they're telling me that half of the people at least speak English, but he's gonna do a pre-translation piece that he's going to hand out to people so that those in the audience who don't speak English they won't need a translator. They'll just read what I'm saying.
Okay.
And I don't know how well that'll work, but I've tried a translator a couple of times. It worked well in Germany because the guy was up to speed and he had a good energy. But in Poland, it didn't work out quite so well, and the audience was left a little bit hanging. So I'm kind of hesitant to do that, the translator kind of thing again. Yeah, not unless I can bring some sort of means of subtitles. Live subtitles to just appear beneath me as I'm talking to a live audience.
Now, okay, your new book is Foundational Falsehoods of Creationism. That's based on your YouTube series, correct?
It is. It's based on the YouTube series. Of course, I put a lot more into it. I said, and the publisher wanted me to say everything that I said in that series, which is good because it is the same arguments. I have to say the same things. I can't just ignore everything that I already said and then come up with completely new information. I still have to have all of that. I just had to have a whole lot more to it. So there's at least 5 times as much new material in the book as there was in the videos, I would guess. And I throw in a lot of things like like failed prophecies in the Bible, background information on a debate that I had with the Board of Education and what a complete fiasco that was. And I'm going to go over a list of things that I put in that are kind of new, concepts of discussion, arguments. It's kind of hard to itemize them because they're all over the place. I mean, I go in one chapter, for example, I actually think in a couple of them, I go through multiple movies that we have in our mass media that teach science wrong. A prime example would be the movie Lucy, where we only use 10% of our brains. And if you take this ridiculous mystery drug, then you can suddenly use 100%, and that gives you the ability to stop time with your mind.
Oh, okay. The Scarlett Johansson one. I thought you were talking about something about the Australopithecus skeleton.
Yeah, I don't know why they called it Lucy because that was confusing, especially in the end of the movie where she actually meets Lucy, where Lucy meets that Lucy.
Oh, so Scarlett Johansson herself is not named Lucy?
Yeah, Scarlett Johansson is named Lucy, and later she meets the other Lucy, the Australopithecus Lucy.
Oh.
And the movie started out with great promise. I really liked in the beginning of the movie the suspense thing. There was a lot of play in like where you realize that this girl is being positioned to be attacked, and the way that they would do that, the director would show the girl walking into a place where she's going to be in trouble, and then they would show a picture of like cheetahs in the Serengeti starting to pace toward their prey, and then it would shift back to her. It was a wonderful way that they played that. I liked that aspect of it, but the rest of the movie is just ridiculous, and it's so sad that you have somebody like Morgan Freeman, who he doesn't have, honestly, time or interest in learning the actual science. And why would you? I mean, you can't expect everybody to know all of this stuff, but it's at the same time you want to say
he's Morgan, God. He doesn't need to know anything.
It's not that God knows all things, or that God doesn't need to. Mm-hmm. He's a Mr. Deity type of guy.
Yeah.
That's kind of a marvelous concept. But yeah, everything about the premise of the movie is complete junk. And I remember an interview with the director of that. He says, "Well, you think I don't know that? I've been working on this movie for 9 years. Of course I know that none of this is true." So yeah, well, then science fiction becomes science fantasy at that point. Oh
yeah.
And then I go through a lot of other movies too about just how ridiculous they all are, and the reason that nobody understands evolution is largely because of our mainstream media. I mean, look what the hell. You remember the TV show Heroes?
I know of it. I never.
Suddenly, they're all in their puberty stage, and they just suddenly develop mystical powers, right? Mm-hmm. It's just like in the X-Men. When the X-Men is another good example of this. The reason that nobody understands evolution is because of movies like Heroes and X-Men and fucking Pokemon, which teach everybody wrong, so that everybody comes up with this completely wrong idea. And this is what the whole creationism movement is about: is to keep people thinking wrong.
But okay, getting back onto creationism. You also, I was actually wondering, sort of, what is like the current state of the creationist movement? Because I mean, I remember, back since the last 10 years, it was sort of, since the Dover trial, and I was wondering, is there still a serious push for creationism?
There's a massive push for creationism. As you saw with Ken Ham's opening of his Noah's Ark park, he took the most ridiculous, most unbelievable story of the entire compilation of fables, and he made this big boat-shaped building as a museum so that he could convince people who don't know any better that the Noah's Ark story is somehow plausible, that all of this, this 5-story building could have been built by one 600-year-old man and 3 untrained laborers using only Stone Age tools. So yeah, we're supposed to believe all of this on top of every other impossible thing on that. And it's all a matter of pretend. I mean, Ken Ham has said himself that, if you're going to believe in salvation, which is the second half of the Bible, then you got to believe in creation, which is the first half of the Bible. And so you have to literally make believe. If you want to believe this, then you have to believe that. And there's not anything about understanding anything. There's certainly nothing about verifying whether anything is true. It's literally make-believe. It's all about pretend. And so one of the ways that they do that is they encourage faith. They encourage this unsupported belief, where you just assume things without justified reason. And then, of course, they lie to people, which is, creationism is all about lying to people. And so what they've done is when they failed the Kitzmiller versus Dover trial, then they found loopholes in several different states such that you have now thousands of schools across the country that will not teach evolution and that are teaching biblical creationism through a number of different loopholes. In a couple of states, they've even found statewide means, and I think it's in Tennessee and Louisiana, where they teach creationism as science, using the Bible in the classroom, literally teaching the Bible instead of science in a science classroom. And there's a young activist named Zach Copeland who's been all about that. He's from Louisiana, and he started taking on his Senate when he was just in high school. And that was when Bobby Jindal was in charge of the place. Yeah, and now Bobby is out, and apparently the person that they replaced him with is more science-friendly, and so we're hoping that Zach has better options this time, because he's gone to fight their Senate every single year since they passed this law, trying to get them to repeal it. And one of those cases was so embarrassing. They brought evidence of evolution. They brought one of these speciation events. I think it was one of the first widely publicized speciation event that they could confirm in the lab. And one of the senators stopped him in the explanation and said, because they were talking about, of course, microbes, because it's the easiest thing. You're going to study in the lab something that goes over thousands of generations. Obviously, you're going to talk about something that has, that has a very slow very rapid generations, right? You're not going to be doing it with something that takes 20 years to get to a point where it can reproduce again. You're going to be using things like microbes. You're going to be using bacteria, right? These are how they identify, evolution. So they use this evidence, and they forget naively that they're not talking to honest people. Mm-hmm. Okay, they're talking to creationists, people who do not want to understand and will fight understanding.
Yes. So
the senator interrupted them to say, well, if you're saying that this is, evolution of bacteria, what did the bacteria turn into people? And of course, Copland and his team sat stunned, bewildered.
Yeah.
Look, this was a guy that was elected to a public office, supposedly because of his leadership capability, and he just said that. And now we have Mr. Pence, the Republican vice president nominee, who says that evolution is, quote, just a theory, unquote, and he wants to teach intelligent design nationwide in public schools. I want to talk to politicians directly. Mm-hmm. I mean, every time they say something that's stupid, there's no other word for it. It's either dishonest or stupid. You don't get another option.
Yeah.
There needs to be some way to address that. Really, you think that snakes and donkeys can talk? You think that a guy can live inside fish for 3 days? Mm-hmm. You think that any of this nonsense makes sense? Do you understand the difference between literal and parable? I want to have conversations with these people, and I think they should be held accountable. We ought to have a society where people raise their eyebrows at anybody that believes that horse shit.
Absolutely.
Not at the people who don't. Why is it that the atheists are the least trusted? We're the most trustworthy. Mm-hmm. What the hell? So, I mean, I want to do the best that I can to improve the image of atheists as a voting demographic. And I'm also working on the Atheist Out program. I'm still very much behind that. One of the things that I've done for that is I've contacted the Pew Research polls, and I've asked them. I brought up that looking at their own polls, you see that only 3.1% of Americans identified as atheist, and another 4% identified as agnostic because they don't know what agnostic means. Sure, agnostic means that you don't know, and that means that they don't know that they're atheist.
Yeah.
So, I mean, virtually every agnostic in the United States, everybody that calls themselves agnostic is an atheist, and they just don't know it because they've all been lied to about what an atheist is. Mm-hmm. They've been told that an atheist is someone who knows there's no God. Wrong. Now, while I do know that there's no God, I'm not typical of all atheists. You don't have to know. You don't have to have the understanding that I do about this. You don't have to have the logical reasons that you can assert that, that I know that there's no God in the same way and for the same reasons and in the same sense that I know that there's no leprechauns. Okay, it's the same kind of thing.
Absolutely.
You could present a leprechaun, and but I have reason right now to say that there are no leprechauns. We know that it's impossible. There's no precedent, no parallel, no verified phenomena to even show that such a possibility exists. Is it possible for a leprechaun to exist? I mean, is it possible? No, it's not possible for a leprechaun to exist.
Okay.
It's just flat out not. And when you're talking about God, if you think there's a possibility there's a God, then you haven't given it enough thought. Because for something to control everything that ever happens, when you lose your keys, that there's a reason that you lose your keys, right? Well, then what happened to free will? Right? What the hell? Does everybody have free will? Because they're apparently not using it. How does God orchestrate everybody if they have free will? Because that's the negation of the whole thing where everything happens for a reason. There's no part of the God belief that is possible. So all it is empty assertions. We can put Hitchens' razor to it. Positive claims require positive evidence. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And that which is asserted without evidence can be dismissed without evidence. And then we have to know what evidence is. And, of course, I feel it in my heart. I'm sorry, that's not evidence. That's a blind assertion. But getting back to the point, people don't know what atheist is, right? Yeah. So they think that it's a positive belief, that it's an assertion of belief, or worse, in what I was taught, is an atheist believe in nothing, as if atheism was the same thing as nihilism, or it's the same thing as You have some kind of like Zen Buddhism kind of thing where you don't even believe that reality exists.
Yeah.
Something along those lines. They come up with every means they can to denigrate the atheist mindset and tell you that, well, you can't really be atheist unless you know all things.
Yeah.
No, I don't have to know all things to know there's no damn leprechauns. and I don't have to know all things to know that God isn't possible either, and to know that there's no evidence of God, and to know that the greatest authority on God, the greatest authority there ever was, doesn't know shit. The greatest of all of them. But, it's like George Carlin said, that he has just as much authority as the Pope does, just not as many people who understand that. So I asked the Pew polls. I mean, when you look at these, you have the 3.1% say they're atheists, and the 4% say they're agnostic, and then you've got another 15.8% who identify differently, who say that they have no religion, right? And of them, all but 1.1% say that not only do they have no religion, but that religion is unimportant. Mm-hmm. Well, I'm sorry, those are atheists. And in the 1.1% who say that religion is important, yet they don't have a religion themselves, they mean that religion is important for other people.
Yeah.
That maybe there's a cultural importance to it. So I would bet that all of them in that entire category, we're talking about a quarter of the country now, would have identified as atheist if they knew what the fucking atheist was.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I find great resistance to this, saying, well, I'm not atheist. Just because I don't believe in gods doesn't mean I'm atheist. Yes, it does.
I know. I used to be one of those people.
So I wanted to ask the Pew polls. I said, I'm thinking, I know that we have a whole shit ton more than 3.1% of atheists out there. And by the questions that you're asking, it seems that the labels are what are getting in the way. So if you ask people simply, do you believe in God? Because that's there's not a middle ground. Mm-hmm. You're either convinced there's a God or you're not convinced. There's not a I don't know fence sitting thing. No, that middle position does not exist. No. You're not convinced until you are. There's not. And if you want to entertain that's possible that there's a God, fine. Okay, you want to imagine it's not, but that doesn't matter. You don't have to know that it's not possible that there's a God. You can imagine that there's a possibility that there's a God, but are you convinced that there is one? Mm-hmm. And that's where that middle of the road, that fence-sitting thing no longer exists. If you're not convinced, you're atheist. Done. Yeah. So I want the Pew polls to ask the following question. It's very simply this. Instead of asking, do you identify as atheist or do you hold a religion? Throw all that bullshit out. Mm-hmm. Just ask this question. Are you convinced that an actual deity really exists? Because I've had people say, well, I believe there's something. We all believe in something. Uh-huh. We all believe there's something. But is it a God? Is it a magical anthropomorphic immortal? I mean, does it control every aspect of your life? I mean, are we talking about Einstein and Spinoza's God, which really isn't a God at all? Are we talking about magic bearded man? I mean, where are we going with this? Are we talking about the fates? So, I mean, and there was an interesting poll that they did also where they asked a number of scientists, American Academy of Scientists, whether they believed in a God or a higher power. And I don't know why they put the comma or higher power on there. I think they just meant to clarify what they meant by God. Mm-hmm. But a substantial number of the scientists took that to be a choice of two options. Did you believe in a God? Or, second option, do you believe in a higher power? And a lot of the number of the scientists, not a lot, certainly not a majority, but a number of the scientists did not believe in a God, but did believe in a higher power. Mm-hmm. And that threw the poll off, didn't it? And now the higher power could be equated to something like Gaia, to the Force from Star Wars, to Einstein and Spinoza's God, for example. Mm-hmm. But of course, that's not an actual deity. It's not a magical anthropomorphic immortal. It's not something that anybody could recognize as a God. It wouldn't fit those criteria. Mm-hmm. And of course, the majority of the scientists didn't believe in either of those things, because the more you know, the less you believe. And so this is what I want the Pew polls to come out with. Just that simple question, worded that way, so that we can get past all the labels. So you don't have to explain to every Yahoo that takes this test what the hell an agnostic is. Because I get really tired of having to explain it. And just like you said you were in that boat once upon a time, so was I. For 15 years, I called myself an agnostic pagan for Christ because I didn't know what the fuck,
Agnostic pagan. That's got to make one hell of a T-shirt.
Yeah, and I started, the more research I did, the less Christ-like I was, and then eventually I realized that the agnostic thing didn't fit either. And it was a very disappointing day to realize that I was an atheist, to realize that word actually fit me. And I had to embrace it, because I took it at first that atheism is a resignation, not a resolve. I mean, people say that atheism is a belief system. Why the hell would anybody want to believe in atheism if it were a religion? That doesn't make any sense. My prior belief system before that was Jedi. I believed that I had infinite reincarnations and psionic abilities and all like this. I mean, that all I had to do was pass into that afterlife, and it's a whole nother series of next level video game bodies for me.
Isn't that Scientology?
No, it's far beyond that. I had a completely different type of spirituality, but mine was way better than the whole heaven thing. I wanted to be reincarnated in 1,000 different worlds in 1,000 different forms and just experience life at the next level again and again and again. Just like with video games at the time. You go into a store, plug a quarter into the machine, and you would go through multiple levels. Every time you die, you come back as something else in another level, right? So, I mean, this is kind of the spirituality that I had. I didn't believe in reincarnation as coming back as a cow. I didn't believe in reincarnation coming back in this planet. I was so full of New Age woo-woo that I thought that there was multiple overlapping realities or dimensions. I feel like such an idiot that I thought that dimensions were this thing, that you could have, 100 different Earths overlapping each other, and you could do a dimensional transfer into a completely different reality on this planet, but it wouldn't be recognizably this planet anymore. Yeah. And it's all because of the nonsense that I was raised with. I had my head filled with such bullshit forever. And this is what they're doing to kids. They want to make sure they don't get educated, that they don't understand the way things work, and that they fill their heads full of nonsense. So then, they come out being pudding heads, ready to believe anything. It no longer matters that our kids are able to understand things, work things out, and be actually capable of taking over the reins when we're indigent. Instead, what's important to this generation is that our kids are just as deceived as we were, and that they believe the same delusions that we held, and that we actually regress, which is a huge problem for me. I've actually had arguments as a child, even with adults, who complain to me that progress is a bad thing, just in general. Yeah. I mean, one of my family actually told me once, when I was 5 years old, I was saying we're going to go back to like 1968 here, where my grandfather told me that they've already invented everything they're going to invent. And there is no future. That was the other part of it. There's no future to believe in throughout my childhood. And at the best, the only hope of the future that I was ever given, as the way that I was raised, was I was told that any minute now, all the governments are going to collapse into chaos, and we're all going to have to make a gun run to the grocery store to get canned goods to go hide in the hills. This is what I was told regularly throughout my childhood. And so I honestly thought, because this, when you get the same kind of message, dropped on you all the time, you kind of think that that's what it is. Yeah. And then one day when one of my family said, you should open an IRA account, because then when you're 75, you would have $1 million. I'm like, you just told me the banks are going to collapse by Thursday. That's when I realized there's an inconsistency here. Yeah. And very often with these people, the only time they seem to get happy about anything was when they read disturbing news and they think the world is about to end. And now they're excited. Now you've got big smiles. Yeah. Because they can't seem to get any joy out of life as it is. And the real world and understanding things is completely beyond them. So they want the real world to end so that their magic imaginary world can begin. That makes religion extremely dangerous, and this is why I'm an anti-theist.
That's actually one of those things that I say a lot when I'm pontificating, is that our society's fascination with the apocalypse isn't so much our fear that the world is going to end, but that it's going to just continue without us. That if we're not living in the end times, we are not, the characters of the great climax of history. We're just, passing by.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't worry about too much. I mean, the one thing the Christians got right is that these are the end times for Christianity. Christianity has decades left at most, and at the rate that it's going now, there's not going to be a Christianity left, even in the United States.
Really?
And I'm talking about, I will probably still be alive when Christianity has lost all of its political power in the United States. You will still find the occasional whack job. It's not going to die out completely, but it's not going to be the force that it is now.
Yeah.
And I would like to think that it isn't going to be replaced by Islam either, because there's, while everybody says and has said for a long time that Islam is the fastest growing religion, the irreligious nuns are the fastest growing demographic with reference to religion. So we are actually outpacing Islam. Mm-hmm. The only difference is that we're not killing the infidels. We're not killing the people that don't believe like we do. I think what would end up happening is if we did get the dominance that we should have. I mean, it should be normal not to believe impossible nonsense for no good reason. Mm-hmm. But instead of punishing the heretics and killing the apostates, what we should be doing is giving them medical treatment and therapy. Because my thought is, in Christianity, when people tell me that they're a Christian, I say, it doesn't have to be the chronic debilitating condition that it used to be, because with treatment you can get a complete recovery.
All right, Aaron, it's been awesome talking to you. And hopefully this will be only the first of many episodes to come with you as technically my boss.
Well, I'm looking forward to it. And do you have any kind of schedule for upcoming guests or ideas of your own?
We have. Again, I've gotten a number of very positive responses to feelers I sent out for my potential.
Very good.
I don't want to give the names out just yet in case they back out. But
people don't usually back out on me until I've made the final announcement and they're supposed to be there that evening. But
that's basically how it works.
Yeah. What? They're getting divorced? You mean neither of them are going to be here? All right. Well, yeah, that happens. But yes. I'm looking forward to getting a little bit more visibility on your show, which is kind of awkward since it's audio.
Yeah. Yeah. Audibility.
But and I'm feeling more political than anything else, because, as I said, we're not being properly represented. When somebody like Pence can be the vice presidential. A realistic shot at vice president, then we're not speaking up loudly enough. We're not being represented, and the pundits and the lobbyists and such need to know that we are not 3.1% of the population. We're not even a quarter of the population. My bet is that we're a third, at least, of the population. And the reason that I say that is because I've met so many people who insist on identifying as Christian or Jewish or Hindu, even though in each of those three cases they've admitted to me that, and they're not limited to just those three religions, multiple examples at least in the Christian ones, but they admit to me that they call themselves Christian, Jewish, or Hindu, even though they don't believe in the scriptures and they don't believe in any God. And I said, well, if you don't believe in any God, that makes you atheist. And they're like, shh. Well, we got to get past that. There is no sense in identifying as something you do not believe, especially when it comes to the detriment of all of your own rights.
Yeah, absolutely. This has been the Secular Nation Podcast. Again, I am your host, Tim Brannan. With me is AronRa, the president of the Atheist Alliance of America, who also sponsors this podcast. I like
the sound of that.
Yes. Signing off.